Today we're talking about e-form design best practices. You've got 3 key things to talk about. I just want to quickly check to make sure that you can hear me. And let's see, Hillary, are you there? Can you just confirm that voice is coming through?
Yeah, I can hear you, and I've started recording.
Thanks for doing that. So we're a little bit early, but I think we'll start anyway. Usually we start at 8:05. And anyway, welcome to the webinar. Today we're talking about a short 20-minute webinar for you, and we're really going to go over 3 things, 3 best practices for you. The first one is data-driven design. And this is key because it helps you to create dynamic forms that are reusable, and it saves you time and money, and we'll talk more about that in a second. The second thing is creating a web service that is loosely coupled, so it doesn't actually do validation. And we'll talk about why that is such an important concept. And some of you may not be using web services, but it's still good to know why this loosely coupled interface architecture is key. And then finally, we'll talk about how InfoPath enables this second best practice by using client-side validation, unlike other applications. So let's dig in. So first off, what is data-driven design? We talk about it a lot here at Qdabra. Data-driven design is allowing, and I got this little image here. It's a really simple image that I think will explain it. When you create a form, you can actually add the data for your form. Like let's say you have a survey form. You can have those survey questions in your form. This is the red box here. When you change your questions, you've got to change the form. You've got to republish the form, right? So very simple. If your form is hard-coded with your survey questions, and if those questions change, then by golly, you're going to have to republish your form. The data-driven design, in a nutshell, is taking the data outside of the form. So, for example, it could be a SharePoint list, it could be a SharePoint library, it could be a database. And when it changes, you don't have to publish the form because the data changed outside the form, but the form didn't change, right? So the data can change, you can go to the list, you can update the questions. Because the form is pulling those questions in from a list, it doesn't need to be republished. So that's, in a nutshell, what we talk about when we talk about data-driven design. It's about moving the stuff that changes outside of the form or outside of the design so that you can have one form for multiple solutions. In addition, when you make changes, like I just said, it doesn't impact that existing form, and that's great because it means you can reuse the same form over and over again. But it's also great because it creates a better design. So instead of having lots and lots of data in your data source, you have a very simple one. Let's take a look at an example here. And these will be part of the kit that you get as part of the webinar package. So I want to look at this one, I believe. So we have a simple form here that is going to pull questions in. And I typically talk about a scenario where, let's imagine for a moment that you're a classroom teacher and you've got a quiz that you give your students every Friday afternoon, and you're using InfoPath because it's free and you love it, and you can create a quick survey, your silly survey form, and this survey form is going to give you the ability to give them a quiz. But every Friday the quiz questions change, and you want to make sure that those questions can be changed without having to republish the form. So here you see on the right we have our fields, and the fields have a repeating section for question and a repeating section for survey. Now you may not need to have surveys repeating because you may just have one survey per form, but this form actually allows for multiple surveys. If we pick a survey, let's say we want to pick a restaurant review, we've got different questions than if we pick a movie review. So this is how this works, right? It's very simple. But these questions are actually getting pulled in from a secondary data source. So rather than hard code the questions in the form, we're actually pulling those questions in from a data connection, in this case our config file. And so what I can do is I can go in and I can edit those questions and re-import them into my form. And that gives me a data-driven design. The questions exist outside of the form. And to show you how that looks like, I have a quick image here that shows this. We have on the left the form with the questions, and on the right we have a configuration form that allows us to edit those questions. When we save, these are both InfoPath forms, so the config form, which generates the questions, is actually separate from the actual form that we're using to display the questions. So we have two XSNs, one that edits the questions and generates an XML called config.xml or questions.xml, and another XSN, InfoPath form template, that pulls the data that was generated by that config form into the form that displays the questions. And this allows you to have a data-driven design. And because the data is outside of the form, we can have one form here to publish for all of our classroom quizzes. Instead of having one quiz per class, per week, per teacher, lots and lots of different templates over time, we just have one template and the data changes. Let's see here, back to my slide here. That's the first demo I wanted to show you. Actually, the first demo I wanted to show you is the same idea as that data-driven design, but we're using a drop-down. And this is a more common example. So we have a starter form here that has a drop-down in it. Now this drop-down is tied to a secondary data source. Now, if I have this standard way of doing a drop-down, let me just copy this and show you the standard way. The standard way you would do a drop-down is you would actually go in to your drop-down list box properties and you just enter these values in manually, right? Hello, goodbye, whatever, right? And if you change those values, right, so you publish the form to SharePoint or whatever, and you go in and change the values, then you will need to republish the form because the values in the form changed. So that's the typical way people do this, and it requires edits, republishes, and it requires just republishing the form a lot, which takes time. The other way to do it is to actually bind the values to a secondary data connection. Here we have a secondary data connection called status. So we have our status values, and we actually have these status values on SharePoint in a list. Actually, it's in another file on SharePoint. And so we're pulling that in, and if we look at the data connections here, you can see that that status file is actually on my training site here. It's actually been converted into a UDCX file, a universal data connection. But I have this out there on my SharePoint site. When I open the form, that data will change. That data will be pulled in from the site, and if I want to change the data, I just go out to the site and I make the change. I don't have to republish my form. Okay, so this is how you would connect a drop-down to an external data file, and then this gives you a data-driven design because the data is outside the form. You don't have to worry about when things change about republishing the form. And if we preview this, we'll see that it's pulling in these values. We're getting this pop-up saying we're pulling in the values from that external site. Of course, if this is in the browser, it's a lot faster because it's all in the same site usually. And here we have those 4 values in that file on the site. Okay, so that's another example. But data-driven design isn't limited to your fields or your drop-downs. You can also use data-driven design to control how your form looks. And the next example will show this. I have an expense report form that has been localized. And this form looks like this. Doesn't look very interesting, right? Until you click Preview. And now you can see, oh yes, indeed, this is indeed an expense report form. And it's been localized to these other languages. And this is all just one view with labels that switch depending on which language I pick. How did we do that? Well, once again, we're using an external secondary data file to contain or to include all of those different labels, those different strings, those localized language-specific strings. So here, if we look in our data connections, you'll see that we're pulling in this expense report localization 5. Now what I can do is I can go out to my localized version. Here's my localized form. So this is my config form, right? We have data-driven design usually requires 2 different forms, your form that edits the configuration data, in this case our questions, and the form that displays the actual data. So here, let's just change this to webinar report, webinar expense report, or something like that. And then we'll just save this file out as just a stock XML file. We'll call this, we'll just save it over the one we already have there. And then we'll go to our form, to our data connections, and we'll just update it. Now you can also have this be automatic. So by updating the data connection, I still have to republish it, but I can get away from that by simply moving this file out to a SharePoint site and having it pulled in automatically. Actually, what I want to do here is go to Resource, and you can see I've done this before, and that should do the trick. I might have done this wrong, but let's just see if this works. Okay, so that worked. So it updated the labels based on that configuration change I made. So that's an example of how you can use a data-driven design to control the labels in your form, right? You've got now the way we did that was we actually added calculated values that looked up the values based on the language that was selected. And you'll get these examples so you can take a look at how we did them. So moving right along, the next example I want to show is code extensions. So a lot of times you have a situation where you want to add a little bit of extra stuff to your InfoPath form. So you can write code. InfoPath has wonderful support for extending your forms to add a little bit of extra functionality. We built a common library called Qrules that a lot of people use to do just that. When people write code, though, they typically write a different DLL, a different code library for each form template. So you can see they have A, B, C, D, and E. The problem with this is that, let's say that you change one of these, or you change your form. Well, then you have a dependency here that breaks, and so it's basically a brittle solution, and it requires maintaining all of those different code libraries. So we say don't do that. Use a data-driven approach. And here we're using a data-driven approach to create a common library, and what's data-driven about it is the command that we're passing to this library. Qrules takes a command, and you pass a command as a rule, and then the command actually tells Qrules what to do. And so it's not dependent on a specific form template. It can be used in all kinds of templates. So as an example, I have a sample here that I like to talk about. It shows how to copy repeating data, which is a very common thing that people would want to do. They have a secondary data source with a table. They want to copy those values into their main data source. There's lots of scenarios where this is actually useful. And we've got a button here, copy using insert, that will allow us to do that. So if I click on preview, it will give me 3 lines here. And if I delete my rows and come down here and copy using insert, you can see that those values up above, if I change this to some big number and copy it again, you can see that that big number got copied down. Now Qrules is a common library, so you can see here in the designer we have Qrules over here in the data source, and what we're doing when we copy those values is we're specifically setting the Qrules command to this command called insert, and the insert command is taking a bunch of parameters. Now because we're passing the location of the parent and the child, this command library is data-driven. It can be used in any form. The command is what changes, not the actual code. So that means that you can have one generic code library that you use for all your forms. So that's another example of a data-driven design. The final example of a data-driven design is a web service. So similar to how you would create an extension library for your forms, we can create a web service to submit your data to a SQL database, or we could create a web service to query data from a SQL database. The typical way to do this is to create one web service per form. And the problem is when your form template changes, that web service has to be updated. And that creates a maintenance nightmare because you have lots and lots of templates, so you're going to have lots and lots of web services. So we say don't do that. Create one web service that is generic, and it's going to pass the data to the database using a mapping file. So this web service is essentially data-driven. Depending on which template passes the data to it, it looks up the mapping and maps it to the database. Similarly, when it's querying data, it queries using a data-driven query string. So the actual search filter, or the search string, you say, I want to query this table for all the values that equal whatever, that search string is actually encoded as a separate piece of data when you query the web service. So let's take a look at an example of that. Actually, I don't have an example of that, but if you're interested, send us an email. We can do a quick demo for you. And that's also an example, because the web service is storing the data. Let me show you the diagram here first. This is a diagram that shows you this web service in the middle, one web service for all of your forms. And it's storing the data in a database. And the key thing here is that we're actually storing the XML data. And that allows us to create a loosely coupled data connection. If the data changes, the web service can just change the mapping using our admin tool, and the mapping will then specify extracting. It'll tell the web service how to map the data that changed from the new form into the existing database. Because this is in a mapping file, it's data-driven. Because we're storing the XML at the same time, we can convert all those previous versions using the new mapping by running a command to reshred or remap all of that data. But what I want to talk about next isn't the notion of a data-driven web service, but rather the power behind a web service which is loosely coupled. In this case, loosely coupled means that the client, the InfoPath form, can change, the database can change, and the solution, it does not break. So it's flexible. It's loosely coupled. There's no tight binding between the form and the web service, or the web service and the database. The form passes an XML file to the web service. That's your data file. The web service takes that XML file and stores it in the database. There's no validation that happens on the server. There's no failure when the user submits the form. And that's very powerful because it means that the submit will always succeed. And that's a better user experience. Also, it means less data loss. If somebody's getting on a plane, they click the submit button and it's invalid. They don't have time to fix it and resubmit it. So you always want the submit to succeed. In addition, if you're submitting it, but the process of submitting it has a bunch of different hops in it, or if the data is cached on your local mobile device, or if there's a bunch of hops that don't validate it but that pass it around before it gets to its eventual location, then you can't fail it automatically. You can't fail it synchronously. So you have these web service solutions now with lots and lots of different pieces in the data transfer. So you can't guarantee that the submit will be synchronous anyway, so there's no way you can fail it because the failure might happen many minutes after you submit it. In addition, when you update the client, you don't want to have to bring the system down. So a lot of times the typical traditional model, okay, it's Friday afternoon, we better have a system downtime so we can update our solution. But because this solution is loosely coupled, we can change the client, the InfoPath form, and republish it, and we don't have to bring the system down at all, right? Everyone can continue submitting forms before and after the new version is published, because there's no validation at the back end. We can submit the new XML structures, and the old XML structures are still there. The new XML format can then be remapped, or the old XML can be remapped to the new format by some administrator after hours later in the evening. They just go in and they do a batch mapping. So because we're storing the XML, we can do that. So it's storing a blob of XML in the server, and that allows us to do this remapping, but it also allows us to store complex objects like images, file attachments, and it allows us to round trip the data with fidelity. So SQL data types, database data types are different from your InfoPath form data types. Rich text, for example, is not represented in the SQL data type. So if you want to submit it and have it read back into your form, you need to have that XML stored as a blob in your database so you can round trip that data type. So finally, because there's no validation on this server, there's no code required. You don't have any development costs, which means that the maintenance is lower. When you're dealing with versioning, like I just said, you have two versions on a problem. You just have two mappings. You can map to the same table. The biggest challenge with this new model is convincing the old die-hard DBAs out there that they're still needed because there's lots of work to do, right? Because the DBAs are still in the old client-server-based thinking of validating things on the server and making sure that all the data is perfect. But nowadays we have things like Amazon's Dynamo system, NoSQL implementations for big data, and these are all systems that don't do validation at all on the server. And there are some huge benefits to this loosely coupled approach. Our web service for InfoPath is another example of a loosely coupled interface. And there's the architecture once again. So that's pretty much it. I want to talk about one more thing, and that is in order to do a loosely coupled structure or architecture, you have to have an InfoPath form. Word, Excel, some of these other applications, they don't do client-side validation like InfoPath. InfoPath has this rich logic that you can add to your forms. It will automatically validate the data based on the XML structure and the data types you've specified. And because it's doing that, we can ensure that when they click submit, that data is exactly what we wanted. And that means that you don't have to do the validation on the server. And that enables this wonderful ecosystem of loosely coupled web services that allow you to do more with less code and have more flexibility. So that's pretty much it for my quick webinar this morning. Had a few demos. More than happy to show you more demos if I had more time. I hope you enjoyed it. We do have a special offer today. If you answer, we've got 5 questions for you actually. This is a mistake. We'll send you the slides and the demo samples so you can see how we did the things I showed you today. In addition, if you send us your form, that's an XSN, your InfoPath form template, we'll take a quick look at the data source and we'll tell you what we think of your data source, of your data design. And this is something we don't offer every week. In fact, I think this is the first time we've ever offered this, so you may want to take advantage of that. How do you do this? Well, you're just going to send email to support@qdabra.com, and we will. You want to attach your XSN to that email, and then we'll take a look at it and we'll send you back some information about what you might want to do to make your form better. So I just want to do a shout out. We are all about your eForm roadmap. InfoPath Dev has been alive and well for 10 years now and kicking. We do provide a lot of experience and advice, free advice to you. So feel free to contact us if you need help. and we have new products coming available. So we're actually very excited to be announcing these new products in 2014. We will be having videos and information available soon, but we are looking at building and shipping these. We've been building these products, and we are very excited to ship them to you next year to help you fortify, is that the right word? To help you fill out your e-form ecosystem. And we've got some good apps out here that we're really excited about. And if you've got questions on these, feel free to email us at support@qdabra.com. And thank you very much for your time today. At this point, I will take questions and switch back to my command console here. Looks like we have a few questions. Jania, nice to have you here. Yes, please do send us your XSNs. I'm just kidding. Yes, I know we've received your XSNs already, and they look good, and you've done a good job with those, so no worries there. And then Tiffany, great to see you here as well. Would a large XML file slow down the performance of an e-form? It depends. And this is a great question because a lot of you out there are using browser-based forms. And if you have a form that has a lot of data in it, it's going to be loaded on the same server. That loading is going to happen very quickly. However, if there are a lot of controls in the form, in other words, there's a large view, maybe it's 3 or 4 pages long with lots of drop-downs, and the drop-downs have hundreds of different values, then it could definitely be slow to render in the browser. In addition, if the form is stored, in the content database in SharePoint, which is a separate server, and your front end has to access it, and it's 10 megabytes, there will be some latency there, right? So in general, if you have very large XMLs, you'll want to try to extract what's making it large, or attachments or images. Try to extract those images or attachments and put them into separate libraries or separate picture libraries. And just replace them with links. We have a command in QRules that allows you to do that. It's called Save Attachment. So some of you who may have QRules have probably already used that. Great questions, though. Does anyone else have any other questions? I guess not. Well, I want to thank you all again for joining me this morning, and hope you have a wonderful day. We'll get the video out in an hour or so. And, oh, one more question here from Gus. Can you elaborate on Q forms? I'd love to. Thanks for that prompt. We have been working on various technologies for quite a while, and we basically haven't made our technology available for viewing and editing InfoPath Forms because Microsoft has done such a great job to date. InfoPath Form Services is really a wonderful tool. But we're worried that the Form Services stuff isn't, there's not enough change happening. Microsoft isn't investing enough resources into the long-term roadmap. And so we're actually thinking that we need to now help Microsoft by creating an app for SharePoint and for people who don't have SharePoint. And that app will do some things that we've been wanting, we've been asking Microsoft for a long time. Specifically, these extended features that I talked about in QRules. We're going to be adding a bunch of features to the app that you can use without having to use QRules. You'll be able to map your form to a list. You'll be able to extract those images and attachments to a library. You'll be able to do other things like send your form as PDF. And so this Qform app is going to use the cloud service down below to do some interesting things. So it comes with additional functionality that we haven't seen in InfoPath to date, inserting rows into a table, for example. But I think the biggest reason why we're doing this is we want to increase adoption of InfoPath, and we want to provide a roadmap, a viable roadmap for people who have made an investment in InfoPath, to allow them to continue, continue managing their solutions and maintaining their solutions moving forward. And to that to that end, we are committed to making this platform, this application, free and open for everyone. So I hope that answered your question, Gus. We're working on that, and we will be announcing it formally at the SharePoint conference in March. But if you want to get on the beta program, please let us know. We are accepting a limited number of beta users, I think 47, and we're about halfway there. So if you're really interested in that, just send us an email and let us know. We will have email going out shortly for those of you who are beta customers. I appreciate your patience. We've been a little bit focused on trying to get this stuff done, and so I need to send out an update of when the videos are going to be becoming available and when you're going to be able to start using it. So I appreciate your patience. Anyway, great questions. Thank you very much. We're at the end of our time, so I'm going to stop the webinar. But once again, thank you for joining me, and I hope you have a great day. And don't forget to fill out the feedback. Bye now.